So the first thing which I want to do is just sort of name and acknowledge how difficult the last several days have been, um, and I want to name that for me. I want to name it for our entire community, and really for uh, for everyone who cares about, and there are a lot of people who care about Israel and about what happens in Israel and in the West Bank and in Gaza. Um, I want to say a couple of things that for me, and for many of us, this is personal. So uh, I have texted and spoken with Bram Spira. Bram is a teen. His family moved here from Los Angeles a few years ago, and he is on a year course, and he is in Israel. I've spoken, texted with La Bomzi, who grew up here at Bethel, and she's on the Bina program, and she has spent the last couple of nights in bomb shelters. Her program is being moved up to the north out of Tel Aviv. And it's been a very frightening and anxiety provoking experience, probably from what I understand, more for her parents than and for La. I think sometimes these things are harder on us when we are farther away than they are even for people who are going through them. Um, there are people in our community who have children who live in Israel and who have been affected. I know the Zeiger's son, Asher Zeiger, lives there. I know that Leah Austin has kids who live there. I know that Gladys, who has kids who live there, and many, many others. There's a woman named Meredith who a number of years ago studied with me for conversion. And as many of you may know, conversion, while the chief rabbinate does not consider conservative conversions as adequate for to call somebody a Jew, for the state of Israel, conservative conversions are fine for making Aliyah, and she made Aliyah and lives in Tel Aviv with her husband, and so we have Bethel connections there. In addition, so there's a personal element to this. The second thing, which I just want to name, is that this is Jewish, and I say that I think all of us know that. Here we are, and we're on this because we have a sense of how important this is. But I just want to name that one of the reasons that this is Jewish is because Judaism is not only a religion. Judaism is not merely a set of beliefs that we have about the world, or it's not only about our individual relationship with God. In fact, primarily, an essence of being Jewish is a sense of peoplehood, a sense of connection. It is the people of Israel's covenant with God that that is the foundation of our religion. And so those same feelings that we have when we play Jewish geography, or when we meet somebody who, when we travel to another city and we find the synagogue, or we meet other people who are Jewish, those feelings of connection are core to what it means to be a Jew. And so our feeling of connection with the people of Israel and also the land of Israel is part of our Judaism here in America. And the other piece about that is that what happens in Israel and in the West Bank and in Gaza, in Palestine, deeply affects Jewish identity here in the United States. Whether for some people that's welcome, for other people that's frustrating, but it is part of being a modern Jew, part of being a Jew in the 21st century, and living, in my estimation, during a really amazing time that there is a state of Israel, means that to be a Jew in America is to be affected by what happens in Israel, and so And I want to say that for our teens, I was talking with a parent of teens this morning who are overwhelmed right now by what's happening on social media, by friends who are posting this, friends who are posting that, and they're confused. By the way, it's not just teens. If there are teens listening, you are not alone. There are many adults who are feeling very, very overwhelmed right now, and not sure what to think and not sure how to feel, and sort of being pulled in a lot of different directions. And so I think it's, as I said in the email that was sent out, it's really important for us to learn we've done a lot of work on this in the Hartman course. I see some people who've been part of the Hartman courses that have been taught over the last few years. It's really important for us to continue to talk about these things and to be able to talk about them, not because we are, as I said in the email, we are not going to change or to affect the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by what we do on this Zoom call or in conversations that we have in Durham, North Carolina. But the way in which we talk about that conflict and the way in which we talk about Israel, I think has a great bearing on the future of our ability to continue to be in community with each other and on our Jewish life. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to bring us together tonight. I want to give the things that I want to talk about are maybe some tips about how to go through this moment or these moments. I wish I could say to you that this will not happen again, but I think that these sort of conflagrations are part of are going to be part of the way things unfold for the foreseeable future. And one thing which I want to just urge very, very much is a sense of humility. Please don't be overconfident in your information and in your rightness. I talked with Rabbi Sager today, and in his honor, thank God he is out at a Durham Bulls baseball game, but was very curious about tonight. But I will just bring a poem, an Amichai poem, read it very briefly. From the place where we are right, never will there sprout flowers in the spring. The place where we are right is trampled and hard like a courtyard, but doubts and love make the world loose like a mole, like a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the house was once now destroyed. And that house, probably referring to the temple in Jerusalem. From the place where we are right is hard and trampled like a courtyard. You can't grow anything in a place that is hard and trampled. You can't grow as a person if you are right. And I want to tell you, I have heard briefings from a variety of people over the last 24 to 48 hours. And some of the people who do this professionally, they have spent their entire life's work either as diplomats or studying the policy, etc. They say, for me, this is a heavy lift. There's a lot going on, right? And these are people who speak the language. They speak English, they speak Hebrew, they speak Arabic, they read Hebrew, they read English, and they're trying to put their hands around what's going on. And it's hard. So begin from a place of humility, right? And know that there's as I said in the email, I reject the idea that there are easy answers, and I urge you to be very suspicious of people who offer them to you. I'm going to read you a paragraph or two from somebody he is a journalist who I think does a good job in sort of laying out these things. His name is Mati Friedman. I'm going to include a couple of links. Those of you who follow me on social media, some of this will be repetition, but this is an article that Mati Friedman wrote called Jerusalem, forget the exact name, the Jerusalem of Glue. And in the article, he says as follows. He says, in the spirit of 2021, exciting video clips are ripped from their context here and injected into the ideological circulatory systems to prove whatever needs to be proved. Explosions in the Al-Aqsa Mosque could mean that Israeli police are firing tear gas inside, desecrating the holy site, or that Muslim rioters are shooting off the stores of fireworks they hoarded inside to use against the police, desecrating the holy site. An Israeli driver hitting a Palestinian man near Lions Gate on Monday might be attempted murder, or it could be a driver losing control of his car while escaping Palestinians who were trying to kill him. A video of Israelis dancing at the Western Wall as a fire burns on the Temple Mount is evidence of satanic intent, or of the coincidence that the annual Jerusalem Day celebrations at the wall were going on at the same time that one of the firecrackers set off by the Palestinian rioters ignited a tree in the mosque compound above. And what he goes on to say, the subtleties seem beside the point when the villains and the heroes are so clear. And I'll leave the rest of the article to you, but he's making the point that when you see a video, just know that you can't actually, there are very few videos from which you can say, that's what's happening, that's the story I now understand, right? And it's important to question what you see and to think about many different possibilities of what you're seeing. I'm also going to include an article that Mati Friedman wrote. I do read things other than what Mati Friedman writes, but he wrote another good article called 8 Tips for Reading About Israel. 8 Tips for Reading About Israel. I commend it to you because there's a lot of good tips about, besides being humble, about how to evaluate information during a very tumultuous time. I know that I can say I see some of the kids who are here, adults, we had it easier when we were growing up in school. When you needed to go cite a source, you went to the encyclopedia and you knew that what was in the encyclopedia, I don't know, had some sort of validity. Kids now are taught an entire skill of how do you evaluate information, because it's very, very hard. It is a skill to cite and evaluate information during this time, and it is very, very dizzying, especially when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The next thing which I want to say is that you will hear me say things tonight that some of you may think of as pro-Israel, meaning supporting a particular Israeli narrative in one direction. Some of you will hear things that you may call anti-Israel, that I would call pro-Israel, but wanting Israel to be better, either from a moral perspective, etc. And you may say to yourself, well, which one of those does Rabbi Greyber believe? And what I want to say to you, I want to acknowledge tonight is going to be long form, okay? I know that I'm talking for a while. I want long form, okay? I don't want short form. I know that all of the news magazines need to edit everything down to 2.5 minutes, et cetera. What I want to say is that I can feel, Rabbi Greyber feels many things at once. Okay, I can feel angry and frustrated at the Israeli government, and I can feel incredibly sad and my heart breaking at what is happening to Palestinians in Gaza. And I can also feel that Israel may be completely justified in what it's doing. And you can say, well, which one of those? And the answer is both, right? We are adults. And when we become adults, we feel many things at once and we think many things at once, and we have to hold all of those things together. And I encourage us to lean into that complexity, both of emotions and of spirit. All right. let me get into some of the stuff. Okay, let me see if I have not done this in a particular order. But what I want to do is to present to you my understandings of what or all of the different things that are happening and that have happened over the last couple of days. And please know, I am I have Talmud, I have my Chumash with Rashi. These I feel I'm on a good, on a solid basis. I'm not saying my opinions here to try and convince you that I somehow have a vision to God and that God told me the right politics of this. I claim no such answers. What I am going to try and do is I read a lot about this, maybe not more than any of you, but I'm going to try and sort of talk through from what I hope is a moral perspective, but also a nuanced perspective. Um, many of the different factors and things that are flowing right now. First of all, you have heard about, you may have never heard of it before. I actually went, I went on a bike ride through Sheikh Jarrah when I lived in Jerusalem for the year. It was about a 15-minute bike ride from the apartment where I lived. But you may have heard of house evictions in Sheikh Jarrah, okay? And that is part of the mix. I don't actually believe that I think I would say, there's a narrative out there that Hamas was like sending missiles to Jerusalem and all over the middle of Israel because of house evictions in Sheikh Jarrah. I think that's I don't think that that's an accurate way of understanding the situation. Hamas has many, many other things in mind. And in fact, I'll tell you that on social media, I have seen a number of Israeli Arabs who live in East Jerusalem who have been very frustrated. They have said, we are angry with Hamas because we feel that our peaceful protests about these housing evictions has been hijacked by Hamas and turned into violence that doesn't speak for us. And so within the Arab, Israeli, Palestinian society, just like Jews, there are many, many people and many different opinions. The property I'll say a couple of things that I've learned about this. The property in Sheikh Jarrah is complicated, okay? It was apparently it was purchased by Jews in the early 20th century, maybe even in the late 19th century. It seems to have been purchased because of its proximity to the grave of Shimon HaTzadik, of an important rabbinic figure. And it was in Jewish hands until 1948, when it is in the portion of Jerusalem that fell under Jordanian control. The Jordanians controlled they controlled East Jerusalem and all of the West Bank from 1948 to 1967. By the way, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was founded in the 60s, before 1967, and it was founded in some ways as a revolt against the Jordanians. There is no love lost between the Palestinians and the Hashemite kingdom that rules Jordan, continues to rule Jordan to this day. Jordan is about 90% Palestinian and 10% Hashemite. And the Jordanians did not create a Palestinian state between 1948 and 1967. What they did do is they said to refugees from West Jerusalem. So those of you who've been to West Jerusalem, if you walk around really nice neighborhoods like Talbia and Talpiot and Baca, those are Arabic names, guys, okay? And there are Arab houses and they're beautiful buildings, right? They're beautiful buildings. And the Jews took them from Arabs who fled West Jerusalem in 1967. And when these refugees came across to East Jerusalem, the Jordanians said, well, here are some Jewish houses, and why don't you have these Jewish houses and you can live there. When Israel took Jerusalem and East Jerusalem in 1967, Israel did not immediately displace those, but displace those Palestinians. And there's actually been a court case. I don't know exactly when it started, but it's been brought by what many people consider to be right-wing nationalist settlers who have an interest in sort of reclaiming this Jewish property. It's complicated because they're both because it's both it's close to a religious site, but it's also very provocative. Why it is that you want to put a bunch of Jews into the middle of an Arab neighborhood, is something that is not, let's just say, establishing a peaceful situation. It's complicated because I don't know. Should a Palestinian state be Jew-free? Right? Well, I don't think we would say that. But on the other hand, why are we pouring gas on the fire? So there's been this court case making its way through, and I think what I want to say about this is, and I'll read to you just one statement that I read that I found to be very helpful. Israel offers no parallel means for Palestinians to reclaim their own property in West Jerusalem from before 1948. And again, you're going to think I only read Mati Friedman, but he wrote, the evictions are unjust and inflammatory, and Israel needs properties like this, like a hole in the head. Okay, and the point is that, in my opinion, if Israel doesn't want to recognize a right of return for all Palestinians, which I'll put my cards on the table, right? Like, I don't want to recognize a right of return for all Palestinians, then we can't demand a right of return for all Jews on Jewish property from East Jerusalem. And in my opinion, this is foolhardy, and it's provocative. I'll read you something that Jeffrey Salkin said. He said, in the Israeli meat restaurants, there's a very popular dish called the Jerusalem mixed platter, a mixture of beef, lamb, chicken, and chicken livers. It is actually pretty good, although I don't like chicken livers. He says, in Jerusalem, every conversation about real estate is a mixed platter of history, memory, values, cost, personal history, and personal pain. Israel has a right to those properties in Sheikh Jarrah. Historically, those are Jewish properties. Again, this is Jeffrey Salkin. But being right is not enough. He writes, I do not believe that Israel was right in allowing this particular situation to come to the foreground, especially now, and especially considering the sensitivity that should accompany Yom Yerushalayim, the celebration of the unification of Jerusalem. So that's my little summary of that. Where it is right now, the Israeli Supreme Court has kicked this, has stopped what was going to be a ruling, and has postponed it, I think, for at least 30 days. I think the Supreme Court acted wisely, and I would just like to point out there is a Supreme Court, right, and it seems to have worked, and that sort of Supreme Court decision was going to be released during a very, very tense time. Okay. Now, the next thing that I want to do is talk about what in the world is happening in Israel right now in terms of time. Okay. First of all, today was the conclusion for Muslims. It was the holiday called Eid, and it was the conclusions for Muslims of the holy month of Ramadan. And that is a time when, first of all, the entire Muslim population, or most of the Muslim population, is fasting all day. And it's a time of heightened religiosity. It also happened to coincide with a day called Yom Yerushalayim. The truth is that Yom Yerushalayim used to be sort of a nice day of celebrating the war, the victory in the Six-Day War, and the reunification of Jerusalem. Unfortunately, it has in many ways become a holiday that has been, I would say, hijacked by right-wing extremists who hold provocative marches that are often racist in nature, sort of marching and parading through the old city, and some of that occurred. I'll read you Jeffrey Salkin on that. He says, ultra-nationalist Jews marching through the Arab areas of the old city of Jerusalem, taunting the Arab residents. Sorry, Jews do not have any right to humiliate the Arabs of East Jerusalem. Judaism believes in treating everyone, even and especially the vanquished, with utter dignity. Yes, even our enemies. as our grandmothers and the Jews of Netflix series Shtisel would say, "Pas nicht." This is not the way. Okay, and I would just say, you know, that is a whole element of this confluence of the calendar that came together very badly. You heard about the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The truth is there are videos of the Israeli police force entering the Al-Aqsa Mosque and being in skirmishes on the Temple Mount. Oy, oy, oy. Okay, so this is, of course, something that, if Israel did unprovoked, is deeply problematic. Israel has, I think, an excellent record, especially in light of everywhere else in the Middle East, and certainly in light of how Jewish holy sites have been treated, of respecting holy places. And the status quo of the Temple Mount is that it is overseen by the Waqf of Jerusalem and also by, I think, of Jordan. And we respect the holy places. And the scene of Israeli police officers going onto the Temple Mount and in these conflagrations is deeply painful. The complicating piece here, and I don't have an answer to this. I want you to know that I have heard from high-level people in the Israeli government who have said, we know that it happened, but we haven't seen the report, and I don't know what happened yet. And I have not seen good journalistic reporting about this either. There have been, what I can say to you is there have been times in the past where both Palestinians, East Jerusalem Arab Israelis have thrown rocks down from the Temple Mount onto the Western Wall plaza below. Okay, those of you who know the geography will know what I'm talking about. If you don't, the Temple Mount is up and the Western Wall is down, and you can throw rocks over the side. There also have been reports, and I have not seen this confirmed, that there were weapons, that there were like grenades and other things that were brought into the Temple Mount. And I think, one question here is, hey guys, if it's going to be a holy space, it's going to be a holy space. And if it's going to be a holy space, then you can't be throwing rocks down and endangering other people, and you can't be storing weapons, there either. And so what exactly happened? It's painful to see Israel doing that. It seemed like an overreaction, but I would also just urge us to say that Israel also has the responsibility, first of all, the right to defend our ability to pray at the Western Wall below, and also to prevent the smuggling of weapons and that sort of thing. And that seems to be part of the mix as well. A third piece, and I know I've been going on for a bit. I hope that this is interesting, and I hope that I'm not driving you all crazy. Okay, from the fact that you're still here, I'll assume that we're okay. A third piece is, and I don't know another way to put this, guys. This isn't all about us. Okay. I am aware, those of you who watched the 6:30 news before this, my heart is breaking that Israel has begun some sort of ground invasion. If you watch PBS, I heard Dennis Ross, he said there's a ground invasion, and a ground invasion, it might not mean, that there's like masses of troops going in. It might mean there's special forces or something. This is all escalating. And it's hard to feel that, of course it's not about us, but some of this is not about us. What do I mean by that? The Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is in, I think, something like the 16th year of a 4-year term. And he was supposed to have elections 12 years ago, 16 years ago, something like that. There were supposed to be elections a couple of weeks ago, and Abbas canceled the elections. He canceled the elections for the following reason, as far as I understand, which is that the Palestinian Authority was going to lose, and he was going to be, deposed from power, or the PA was going to be deposed from power by Hamas in elections. And so he said, I'm not having elections where we're not going to win the elections. Now, by the way, I'm going to push you on something here, okay? And I hope this doesn't, diminish you in my eyes, but as much as we believe in democracy, I also would challenge us to say that I'm also not necessarily interested in elections that will bring Hamas to power, because Hamas was elected to power, but they're not committed to the democratic process. They haven't had elections since whenever the elections took place. I know they were during President George W. Bush's term, so that was a long time ago. They obviously don't have a respect for democracy, and part of what democracy depends upon is democracy, right? Like is a willingness to the consent of the loser, and so I'm not sure that we want elections there either. Okay, it's a short way of putting it. Okay, but Hamas is mad at the Palestinian Authority. These are people who don't get along with each other. And part of the reason that they may have been sending missiles over Jerusalem to, quote, defend Jerusalem, it's a very funny way of defending Jerusalem, but to do that is to win popular support and to sort of say, we are the people who will really protect you. The Palestinian Authority doesn't care about you. And see, we care about Sheikh Jarrah, right? Again, I would say none of this is really about Sheikh Jarrah. I'm not trying to justify Israel's actions, which I think are dumb and maybe immoral as well. But Hamas and the Palestinian Authority are engaged in a power struggle, and some of this is not about us. The other piece is that Hamas at this point really probably wants a ceasefire. You may have heard that Israel at this point won't accept a ceasefire. Hamas really wants a ceasefire because they've sort of gotten the things that they wanted out of this particular round. And Israel, and here, I'm just leaning on people like Dennis Ross and and Aaron Miller, who's another, pretty good expert at all of this stuff, who say that if Israel gives a ceasefire right now, then they risk diminishing their deterrence in the region. Hezbollah is watching very carefully. Hezbollah, I don't know if you heard this, Lebanon, which means Hezbollah, shot some missiles. They only shot them into the Mediterranean Sea, so didn't hurt anybody. But that means they're paying attention and they're testing the waters, as it were, to see, should we shoot missiles at Israel from the north? And could we also, what can we get away with? It's not a world that we're familiar with in Durham and Chapel Hill. I'm not an expert. And I would just like to say none of us are really experts at this. And I don't know that there are clean answers to all of these to all of these things. The second thing, it's not about us. Okay. There is an election that happened in Israel. There's no government in Israel. Bibi Netanyahu was about to be deposed from power. Bibi Netanyahu doesn't like to be deposed from power. He likes being in power. He's been in power for a really long time. Bibi Netanyahu, I'm not quite saying that Bibi has all these maniacal plans, but I also think it's really important to pay attention to who's benefiting from stuff like this and who's not benefiting from stuff like this. And I do think that those are all fair questions to raise about what in the world is happening. Okay, I'll sort of leave that piece there. I want to say one other piece that's related to that, though. I was going to say this at the end, but I'm going to say it now. If you ask most Israelis what is the absolute most tragic piece of what's happened in the last 3 days, my guess, and maybe it's my information vacuum, but my guess is the most tragic thing that has happened in the last 3 days has been the riots and the Israeli media has called it a pogrom in Lod. Okay, those of you who don't know, Lod, the Arabic name of the city was Lida. Lod is where the airport is. It is an Arab and Jewish town. There have been riots in Lod. And when I say pogrom, I want to understand, there were synagogues burned to the ground or burned. I don't know whether they were to the ground. Synagogues burned in the Jewish state by Arab Israelis. Okay. And I say it like that, not to pull at your heartstrings, although I think it should pull at all of our heartstrings. But I want you to understand that is is a tremendously traumatic experience for Israelis who understand one of the very purposes of the Jewish state is we as Jews know what it means to live in places where they burn our synagogues, and we founded a Jewish state so that we don't have to do that anymore. And for Arab Israelis, and Arab Israelis are citizens of the state of Israel. Many of these cities have been places of coexistence. And for that to happen inside, this is inside the Green Line. This is inside, Israel, over which there's no. This is not about territory or anything else. That is devastating. It has happened in Jaffa. It has happened in Haifa. It has happened in Akko, and the other very tragic piece of this is that if you follow Israeli politics, for the first time in the past, for the first time in the history of the state of Israel, we were very, very close to having an Arab Israeli party as part of the governing coalition in the Knesset. Okay, Arabs have always had seats in the Knesset, but have never, both some by their choice and some by the choice of Jewish parties, have never been part of what's the majority governing coalition. They have sat in the opposition from the outside. And because there was no way to depose Bibi from power without having an Arab party as part of the coalition, that was like about to happen, or it was really close. It was as close as we've ever gotten. And many people are saying that those efforts to integrate Arab Israelis into modern Israeli society may have been set back by 20 or 30 years based on the events of the last few days. It is really, that to me is desperately heartbreaking and depressing and awful. And I had a friend who is in Tel Aviv, and he said, we can take all the missiles in the world being lobbed at us from Hamas, but this piece of it is devastating, because that's not going to go away in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whenever the next ceasefire with Hamas gets negotiated. A couple of things I know I've gone over. I want to just talk about Hamas for a minute. I am not somebody, I hope you can tell that I am not somebody who paints the world in black and white. And I don't see things as, I don't see things in black and white, and I try to see nuance. I am comfortable saying that if we have a word called evil, that Hamas as a political organization meets that definition, okay? This is not a group of people, by the way, and I say that not about all of the people of Gaza. I think many of the people of Gaza are held hostage by brutal leaders who brutalize their populations. They are not committed to democracy in any way. Most people who do assessments of this say that they base their political calculus. They have the opportunity to create bomb shelters since Israel left Gaza in 2006. They've created no bomb shelters. And the reason that they haven't done that is that they actually don't have an interest in protecting the civilians of Gaza, because the more civilians that get killed in conflagrations like this, the worse it is for Israel. And Hamas has an interest in winning the political battle against Israel in world opinion. Hamas leaders over and over as a regular practice not only use civilians as human shields, but their leadership hides in the bottom of hospitals. Israel has many times had the opportunity to take out the entire Hamas leadership all in one room, and they regularly do not exercise that option because Hamas puts them in one room at the bottom of hospitals. And they say Jews don't do that. Okay? By the way, whether or not the United States would make such an assessment, whether or not anybody else would make such an assessment, it's not clear. But I, for one, am proud of Israel for making those assessments. But I also think that it's important for us to know who it is that Israel is fighting. And I want to say, lest you think that this is a Republican or Democratic thing, the Secretary of State Blinken under the Biden administration said today, and I will quote, there is a very clear and absolute distinction between a terrorist organization, Hamas, that is indiscriminately raining down rockets, in fact, targeting civilians, and Israel's response defending itself. That is targeting the terrorists who are raining down rockets on Israel. And I think that sentence is really, really important for us to remember. And it's really important for us to teach others, because there will be many more Gaza Palestinian deaths and injuries in this conflict. And it does not mean that Israel is far more immoral and that the Palestinians are far more moral, because we are facing, because of the asymmetry of power and the asymmetry of the conflict, and also because of the way that Hamas conducts itself. The last thing that I want to say, and I really, I will open it up for questions. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the last thing which I want to say is another devastating and very, very painful aspect of this past 3 and 4 days. I talked about Israeli right-wing ultra-nationalists who parade through the old city, and there have also been in Lod and in these mixed towns with Arabs and Jews, there have been Jewish rioters, and there have been Jews who have pulled Arab drivers from cars and beaten them. And this is ugly. And I know that I'm in the United States, and I know that it's easy for me to say from the comfort of my living room and to pronounce moral judgments. And there are some things that are absolute wrongs, that are pasnish, that this isn't what Jews should do. And I want to say that thankfully, I have rabbinic colleagues, and there is religious leadership and some political leadership that also rejects these things out of hand. And they are a terrible, terrible outcome of the awfulness of the last couple of days. But we need to acknowledge that this is part of what's happened. It's part of the tragedy of what's happened, and with love, we can say, not this, not this. Whatever our political opinions are about this. So, Alan, I want